why not? So if you would recommend them, why would you? If you wouldn't, which is quite an open question. So you've got a combination of one simple question and then a very open question follow-up. So is this a realistic way forward for the non-profit world? Anybody in the audience like to comment, or David or Nina?
I'd love to hear gut responses on that from people out there who are doing it every day. Can we cut through to a simple, single cut-through approach toward this and learn how to manage to that?
Yes.
For 10 years I was on the board of the ASDA Foundation, and it seems to me that one of the problems about honesty is not just where the money is coming from, but the intermediaries who were employed by ASDA and who did a lot of the follow-up on the ground. The board members, the trustees for the board, we didn't go out a great deal because ASDA has a network of stores, a network of champions. I don't think they're called that, but that's what they are more or less. And so it was really quite difficult to get beyond the fact that there was somebody who was employed by ASDA who would stand up and say this really is first class, and who'd been there several times, and who I had no reason to believe or disbelieve. I should put that the other way around. I think I had no reason to disbelieve or believe. Obviously, because we were trustees, we were to some extent party to the mechanisms that tried to evaluate whether the clients were, or the recipients, were happy with what had happened, what we received in terms of cash, and whether they were delivering realistically. It was not unusual for ASDA employees who were employed to be really quite close to some of the recipients who were larger organisations. It was not unusual for them to be very positive about what was going on. And there was something in me, I don't think I voiced it very much, but there was something in me that always says anyone who's very positive or very negative, and I don't really quite understand why, because it didn't seem to be anything overt that was either of those two things. It was those people had tremendous control over the, or potentially tremendous control over the foundation it's giving, and they also formed quite a useful barrier between the foundation and the recipients, or indeed a useful sounding board that they may have been bouncing back stuff to the trustees that the trustees would never have discovered themselves, because they would never have gone once a week or once a month for 2 years to see how a project was going on, etc.
This goes to a dilemma. Yeah, this is a really interesting point you raise. When I began this journey, I started off my career at the Ford Foundation in the early 80s, and so I initially called this project Every Man's Ford Foundation, or Every Person's Ford Foundation. In other words, if you can't afford to have professional staff who are out there making solid professional assessments, and essentially the quality decision you're making is who you hire, then how do you create a data, an informational basis on which you can have as much confidence as you have in the staff when you're a trustee and you're hiring these people? And it's a big shift, and it's interesting because there's a tension with this, one of your down to 37 rules, where you're giving more discretion to people on the ground, and you're also saying you're starting to invest in another source of legitimacy, which is the voices of people. And does that come into tension with this discretion on the ground, and how do you play that? I don't think it's ultimately, I think it can be a creative tension. I don't think it's a contradiction, but I think it's part of the dynamic that we're going after. But we are definitely going down a road to create an independent informational basis for trustees to make decisions independent from what they might be hearing from staff. And it'll change the whole conversation as we do this, I think. And it's going to be part of this culture shift.
Just on the broader question, and I think around, you know, is there sort of, are we getting to a single question or something like that? I mean, I think I'm at heart a bit skeptical in some ways, and I think, you know, given the complexity, at least in international development, of the kinds of issues and the context that we're working in. So I mean, in some ways, my reaction is that the impact and the ability to measure the impact of our work is still the main thing that we need to focus on, and to be able to, you know, in the private sector, you measure whether or not people buy your stuff. In our sector, I think you do need to measure whether or not you're having the impact that you're investing in. So I think that's, for me, still a critical area. But where I think this work really is about the quality of how that's delivered, the quality of the relationships, and I think that's really important. But to be honest, I think I'm more of the school of, I'm happy for that to be a messy process. But I'm also happy to be convinced that there's a more systematic process.
Yes, I mean, I guess the Net Promoter Score question idea is more, it's not really, I mean, if you also read the epistemology argument and the difference between kettles and chickens and kettles and services non-profits offer, probably the single question is not realistic, but I suppose that it represents a sort of drive towards really fewer questions and less data. And so I suppose the question is whether that's feasible, to really somehow do what you want with a lot less data, so that it is, as you brought up, so that it is feasible and that it's worth doing, and you could do it in the time, for the time and the money.
So we're testing this hypothesis. We believe in cut it down to a very small number of questions. We don't necessarily think that the recommendation question is the right question, but it's on the list. It's on a short list. We've developed over the last few years of practice. We've got about 15 questions that we put on the table as an initial list with clients, and then they always add some that are specific to the kind of work that they're doing. It was interesting, I referred to the Gates Foundation work in education, and it turns out, you know, the right question to ask in classrooms is certainly not, do you like your teacher? But I'll tell you one that turns out to be predictive, which is, do students in this classroom treat the teacher with respect? That correlates to educational outcomes, the answer to that question. Very interesting. And what my kind of rule of thumb takeaway from the search for these powerful predictive questions is, if you can describe a situation through the question that is a proxy for the kind of situation that leads to the outcome very consistently that you want, that will be a great question. So the recommendation question works in the context of consumer transactions, because if you're likely to recommend something, you're likely to buy it. It describes a situation that correlates to the outcome. And so when we go into client work, we try to formulate questions with the client that are trying to get at those things. And usually they'll be, in the case of this education work, which by the way we did not do, it was done by the education department at Harvard University. They tested something like 100 questions, and they got it down to 4 or 5 that correlated to outcomes. And they all described situations that when you heard it, you'd say, yeah, a classroom that's got that going on is likely to produce good learning outcomes. So we're testing that now systematically in our work. We've built an online platform where we're putting a menu of questions that we call them candidate ultimate questions, predictive questions, and then we invite organizations to come on and choose from that menu and test them out and tell us how they're doing. So we want to learn from real practice, and then we work with the people that are using them to triangulate it with their evidence of outcomes, so we can see if we can get to those predictive questions.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any more questions for the panelists about what we've heard, or comments from their own experience? Yes. Okay. One. Then.
Just They're still really interesting and helpful. But one thought that just comes to mind is in the discussion is that we've talked a lot about, and mainly about beneficiary feedback. That's feedback from people who are already using services or involved. And so, what's the role alongside that, or perhaps before that, of getting evidence from people more widely about what the needs are in terms of setting foundations and other funders' priorities. So we're not only, we need to understand how services and projects are working for people involved, but what about the wider population, and are we missing something because in terms of choosing, selecting where to invest in the first place?
Which is what you mentioned, that you're doing a big lottery fund. And somebody over here.
Mary Hogan from 1010. Nina, thank you very much for your very interesting and honest discussion. I wanted to ask about the civil society organisations that you mentioned who are working together on this and who those are.
We have on the civil society question, we have a PPA group on beneficiary feedback being co-chaired, I think, by World Vision and, do you know who the other co-chair is?
It's just shifted, isn't it?
It's World Vision and CDA
Yeah.
and Development Initiatives. So if you're interested in that, I can put you in touch with them. They meet on a regular basis and kind of share their experiences.
Can I say something about the needs question? So I refer you to the article in the issue from the James Lind Alliance, which looks at how this issue is dealt with by them in medical research. But they have this brilliant methodology where they essentially find out from patients what their priorities are, and then they map it against where the funding is going on medical research. And guess what? There's often a lot of disjunction, and then they use that to push the conversation forward. It's very powerful, and I think we need to do a lot more of that. And I wish Tris Lumley were here from New Philanthropy Capital, because he wrote an article about learning in the piece, but he has an idea about how you adapt that methodology in